Tragedy at Haiti's Laferrière Citadel. Stampede kills dozens during UNESCO celebration. A devastating stampede at historic Citadelle Laferrière in northern Haiti has claimed the life of at least 30 people, with authorities warning that the death toll could rise further as rescue efforts continue. Now let's dive deeper and explore every layer of this story on our AI podcast.
Imagine standing inside, like the ultimate safe haven. You know, you were in this massive 19th century stone fortress built on a mountaintop.
Right. Highly defensible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's designed entirely with one singular purpose, which is just to keep danger out. But now imagine that very architecture, constructed specifically to save lives, turning into a deadly trap in an instant.
Yeah, it's a completely devastating inversion of, well, of a structure's fundamental purpose.
It really is. That is exactly what happened this week at Haiti's Citadelle Laferrière.
When the walls designed to protect you become the barriers you literally cannot escape, I mean, the physical and psychological toll on a community is just staggering.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to really unpack this heartbreaking event in northern Haiti. It was a deadly stampede at the Citadelle Laferrière that claimed at least 30 lives.
And we should note up front that officials have warned that the death toll of 30 may actually still rise as rescue and recovery efforts continue.
Right, which makes this a deeply somber subject. But we're taking the sources you've shared with us to understand not just the mechanics of what happened on that day, but the deeply layered historical and present-day realities surrounding it.
Because to truly grasp the magnitude of this loss, to honor the gravity of the event, we really have to look beyond the immediate headlines.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start with the location itself, because you really cannot separate this tragedy from the ground it happened on.
No, absolutely not.
The Citadelle Laferrière isn't just like a scenic overlook. It is a designated UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Yeah, and its historical footprint is entirely foundational to the identity of Haiti.
Right. So let's get into that history a bit.
Well, the timing of its construction really tells you everything you need to know. The Citadel was built in the early 19th century, like almost immediately after Haiti won its independence from France.
So you're looking at a nation that had just executed a successful rebellion.
Exactly. They overthrew a brutal colonial power to become the very first free Black republic in the world.
And they knew that colonial powers would likely try to return, right, to reclaim the territory.
Oh, absolutely. The threat was very real.
Yep.
So Henri Christophe, who was a key leader in the Haitian Revolution, he basically ordered the construction of this massive fortress on top of the Bonnet à l'Évêque mountain.
And it took thousands of workers years to build.
Right. It was constructed as this physical, undeniable manifestation of that hard-won freedom. It was a declaration carved into stone, essentially saying, you know, we are here, we are free, and we will defend our emancipation against any force on earth.
Which is incredible.
Yeah, and it was built to withstand a siege that historically just never came.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially if we look at how different cultures view their monuments. I mean, you can look at the Statue of Liberty or, say, the Eiffel Tower as globally recognized symbols of national identity.
Sure, iconic landmarks.
But the Citadel carries this very specific, incredibly heavy weight of liberation. It is a monument to survival against truly impossible odds.
Which fundamentally changes the nature of any gathering there. The event taking place when this tragedy occurred wasn't a random concert or a sporting event. It was a major annual celebration meant to honor that exact revolutionary heritage. You have generations of Haitians making what is essentially a pilgrimage to this site.
To celebrate their identity.
Exactly, and to celebrate their ancestors' endurance.
And our sources point out that this annual event draws massive crowds. Like a very significant portion of that crowd consists of young people and students.
Yeah, that demographic detail is just vital.
They are hiking up this mountain to actively connect with their nation's history.
And that amplifies the communal grief exponentially. You know, you have a space deeply intertwined with a narrative of historical triumph suddenly becoming the site of a modern disaster.
It almost feels like a violation of a sacred space.
It really does. The stark contrast between celebrating enduring life and the sudden, chaotic loss of life, it creates a profound psychological shock for the entire nation.
Yeah, that transition from celebration to chaos forces us to look at how 19th century architectural design fundamentally clashes with 21st century crowd volumes.
Oh, the clash is severe.
Because I think when a lot of people hear the word stampede, they picture a wild running herd of people in an open field.
Right, like something out of a movie.
Exactly. But the reality of this event was much more constrained.
Well, the terminology we use in the media often fails us here. Stampede implies people making a conscious choice to run, trampling others in a panic.
Which isn't what happened.
No. In human crowd dynamics, particularly in confined spaces, the reality is a phenomenon known as crowd crush, and the physics involved are terrifying.
According to Jean-Henri Petit, he's the head of civil protection for Haiti's Nord Department. This crush occurred near the entrance of the fortress.
Right. And if we look at the design of a historical fortress, the entrance is intentionally built as a severe bottleneck.
Because you build a narrow gate, specifically so an invading army cannot rush in all at once.
Exactly. The architecture is doing exactly what it was designed to do 200 years ago, which is to restrict flow.
But the problem arises when you introduce an exceptionally massive modern crowd.
Yeah, a crowd that completely overwhelms whatever safety measures were in place. And then you combine that with a sudden, unpredictable catalyst.
Which in this case, our sources cite the sudden onset of heavy rainfall.
Right, a massive downpour.
But I want to push back on the idea of unpredictability here just a bit.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
If event planners know the architecture is a permanent 200-year-old bottleneck, and they know the rainy season patterns, how does a planned annual event still tip into a fatal crush?
What's fascinating here is, and I use that word with full recognition of the tragedy we were discussing, but it's how quickly human beings in a high-density situation stop functioning as individuals.
They just become a mass.
They literally become subject to the laws of physics. When a crowd reaches a density of around 6 to 7 people per square meter, physical contact between bodies becomes continuous.
Oh, wow.
And at that exact threshold, individual agency completely disappears.
So you literally cannot move your arms or, choose what direction to step.
You are locked in. You are locked into a collective mass.
That is terrifying.
In that state of density, a single stumble or a sudden surge doesn't just bump the person next to you. It creates a kinetic shock wave that travels through the crowd.
Like a ripple in water.
Exactly. And these waves of physical pressure carry enough force to bend steel guardrails. Human ribs simply cannot withstand it.
It makes me think of an hourglass.
Okay, yeah.
Like if you have dry sand in an hourglass, it flows perfectly through the bottleneck. It's a steady, manageable stream.
Right.
But if you introduce a drop of moisture, the grains of sand suddenly clump together right at the narrowest point.
Oh, that's a really good analogy.
They form a structural arch that instantly stops the flow, and all the weight of the sand above pushes down relentlessly on that one blockage.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. The sudden, heavy rain was the moisture in that hourglass.
Oh.
When a downpour starts, human instincts universally dictates seeking shelter. Suddenly, thousands of people are making the exact same micro-decisions simultaneously.
Push toward the covered entrance?
Or push forward just to escape the weather.
And the people at the very front of the crowd, the ones pressed against the stone walls of the bottleneck, they just have nowhere to go.
They are entirely trapped. The pressure from the back coming from people who cannot see the blockage at the front.
Because they're just trying to get out of the rain.
Exactly. They continue to push forward. And this leads to what medical professionals call compressive asphyxia.
It means they can't breathe.
Right. In a crowd crush, most victims are not trampled on the ground. They are asphyxiated while standing upright simply because the pressure from the surrounding bodies prevents their lungs from expanding.
God, it is a horrific mechanism. An architectural feature meant to defend a nation becomes a fatal trap due to, a sudden shift in weather and a critical failure to manage crowd density before that bottleneck was reached.
It really is.
Which leads us to the grim reality of the human cost and how authorities are navigating the immediate aftermath.
Yeah, the official response has definitely reflected the deep national mourning this event has triggered.
Prime Minister Alex Didier-Fils-Aimé issued a statement, right?
He did. He expressed profound sorrow. He extended condolences to the families and described this period as a time of, quote, mourning and great suffering.
And he specifically noted the demographic tragedy here.
Yep.
Currently, the death toll stands at 30.
Yes.
Knowing that a significant portion of those lost were young people and students, it just adds a devastating layer of irony to this.
Completely.
The Citadel was built to secure Haiti's future. And the very people who represent the actual living future of the country lost their lives trying to connect with that legacy.
It is a profound loss of national potential. The Prime Minister's statement also included a promise that authorities will review crowd management and safety protocols at major public events going forward.
But, a review almost feels insufficient when you are dealing with a known annual event.
Well, this raises an important question regarding the gap between policy and practice. Promising a review is the standard administrative response to a tragedy.
Right.
But if the venue is a known quantity, and the bottleneck has literally existed since the 19th century, why did the safety measures fail so catastrophically this time?
Because safety protocols that only work when conditions are perfect, like when there is no rain, or when crowd sizes don't exceed estimates, those aren't actually safety protocols.
No, they're just optimistic guidelines at that point. If a bottleneck is permanent, flow has to be restricted long before the density reaches that fatal threshold of 6 people per square meter.
Right, you have to manage it miles away.
Exactly. Managing crowd density requires actual infrastructure. It requires trained personnel, physical barriers set up miles down the mountain to meter the flow of people, and robust emergency communication systems.
And implementing all of those measures requires significant resources and state capacity.
Which is the core of the issue here.
So what does this all mean? When we look at the failure of state capacity at the Citadel, it feels like we really cannot analyze this tragedy in isolation.
We really can't.
Because Haiti, as a nation, is absolutely not operating in a vacuum right now. Our sources provide a broader timeline that paints a very grim picture of the realities on the ground.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see a nation laboring under an unfathomable amount of systemic pressure.
Yeah.
The Stampede is an acute, localized tragedy, but it is occurring against a relentless backdrop of chronic national crises.
And the sources are explicit about this context. Haiti is currently struggling with severe escalating gang violence. There are deadly clashes involving security forces happening regularly, which means the baseline level of societal instability is already incredibly high.
Unbelievably high.
And then you look at the recent timeline of major disasters.
It is a sequence of events that would devastate literally any nation's infrastructure.
Just earlier in 2024, a fuel tank explosion killed dozens of people.
Yes.
In 2021, another massive fuel blast claimed around 90 lives. And that same year, in 2021, a catastrophic earthquake resulted in approximately 2,000 deaths.
When you lay out that sequence, a devastating natural disaster, 2 massive industrial accidents, systemic violence, and now a deadly crowd crush at a national monument, you are looking at the brutal mechanics of compounding trauma.
It feels like a bridge that has been struck by successive freight trains.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Like a bridge might be engineered to survive one massive impact. You repair the steel, you reinforce the concrete, and you open it back up. But if a second, third, and fourth train hit it before the initial repairs are even funded at a certain point, the entire structure just loses its fundamental integrity.
That analogy captures the reality of state capacity perfectly. In a healthy system, when a tragedy occurs, society rallies.
Emergency funds are deployed?
Exactly. Hospitals have the beds and supplies to treat the wounded, and civil protection agencies can coordinate an overwhelming response.
The system absorbs the shock.
It absorbs it, recovers, and implements new safety measures to prevent a recurrence.
But in Haiti, the shocks just haven't stopped.
No. Compounding trauma means the infrastructure never has a moment to reset. When you have an earthquake that kills 2,000 people in 2021, you aren't just losing lives.
You are losing physical hospitals.
Right. You are draining the exact emergency response budgets that are needed years later.
So when Jean Petit and the civil protection teams are responding to the Stampede at the Citadel this week, they aren't deploying fresh resources.
No, they're deploying ambulances, personnel, and medical supplies that have already been severely depleted by earthquakes, fuel explosions, and the daily attrition of gang violence.
The causal chain of systemic failure is so direct.
It really is. The resources required to enforce robust crowd control, to hire personnel, to build safe staging areas down the mountain, to maintain emergency access roads, all of that competes directly with the resources needed to rebuild earthquake-damaged infrastructure.
Or to secure neighborhoods against armed violence.
Precisely. When a government's bandwidth is completely fractured, preventive safety measures at historical sites inevitably suffer.
It creates a deeply tragic domino effect.
Yeah.
The broader instability strips the infrastructure of its resilience.
Yeah.
That lack of resilience leads to catastrophic failures in event management, like we saw at the Citadel. And then those new tragedies further traumatize and destabilize the society.
It is a vicious cycle. And it's not just the physical infrastructure that degrades. It is the psychological endurance of the population.
The emotional bandwidth.
Right. The emotional bandwidth of a society can only handle so much collective grief. Families mourning the youth lost at the Citadel this week are likely the very same families still grappling with the economic or personal fallout from the disasters of 2021.
Wow. It makes this specific loss at the Citadel land with so much more weight.
It does.
It isn't just an isolated logistical error. It is another massive blow to a society desperately trying to hold on to its heritage and its future in the face of unrelenting pressure.
Which is exactly why the setting of this tragedy matters so deeply.
Yeah.
The Citadelle Laferrière is supposed to be the enduring proof that Haiti can survive the unimaginable. For that specific site to become a place of such immense suffering, it just feels like a profound historical cruelty.
We have covered some incredibly difficult ground today. We started by looking at the monumental legacy of the Citadel, exploring its powerful history as a symbol of Haiti's emancipation and the birth of the first free Black Republic.
Then we examined the terrifying physics of crowd crush. We detailed how a 19th century architectural bottleneck and the unpredictable catalyst of heavy rain turned a dense celebratory crowd into a fatal kinetic force.
And we looked at the devastating human cost, honoring the 30 lives lost, many of them young students representing the future of the nation.
Right.
And finally, we placed this event within the much larger, darker context of Haiti's compounding crises, tracing how years of natural disasters and systemic violence directly drain the infrastructure needed to keep people safe today.
All of which leaves us with a really difficult reality to confront regarding how we interact with history in the modern era.
How so?
Well, when a nation's monuments of historical triumph become sites of modern tragedy due to infrastructural strain, how does a community safely reclaim its sacred spaces to celebrate its identity in the future?
That is the defining question. If a fortress built to guarantee your freedom becomes the trap that claims your youth, how do you look at those walls the same way again?
It's going to take a long time to heal.
It is a heavy reality to process, but a crucial one. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep asking these hard questions, to always seek out the deeper context behind the news you consume, and to remember that behind every brief headline, there is a complex web of history, physics, and deeply human stories. We'll catch you next time.
Okay, one question for you. What factors led to the deadly stampede at the Citadelle Laferrière, and how did overcrowding, poor crowd management, and adverse weather conditions like rain contribute to the scale of the tragedy? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.